Have you ever had one of those moments where a simple question changes everything? Or someone looks you dead in the eye and asks something so unexpected, so raw, that it stops your world completely? That's exactly what happened to me. On a Tuesday afternoon in Denver, while I was standing on a ladder with a cordless drill in my hand and my heart suddenly racing like I'd just run a marathon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jake Sullivan, and I'm 28 years old, though most people think I'm younger until they see me work. There's something about the way I handle tools and talk to clients that apparently screams experience beyond my years. Been installing custom window treatments for 6 years now, ever since I dropped out of business school and decided that working with my hands felt more honest than pushing papers around a corporate office. I started Sullivan Window Solutions 3 years ago with my best friend Marcus, who handles the sales while I do the installations. It's not glamorous work, but there's something deeply satisfying about transforming a room with the right blinds, shutters, or curtains. People invite you into their most personal spaces, trust you with their homes, and you get to see the immediate joy when natural light hits a room just right. Most of my days follow a predictable rhythm. Wake up at 6. Grab coffee from the same corner shop, load my van with supplies, and head to whatever appointment Marcus has booked. I work mostly in the nicer neighborhoods around Denver, places where people care about details and aren't afraid to invest in quality. The houses are bigger, the clients are usually home during the day, and the tips are decent. I'm what you might call quietly ambitious. Not the type to announce my 5-year plan to everyone at parties, but I know where I want to be. I want to expand the business, maybe open a showroom, hire a few more installers. I've been saving money, living in a modest apartment near downtown, driving a reliable but unremarkable Honda that gets me where I need to go without drawing attention. The thing about working in people's homes is that you become invisible after a while. Clients start their day treating you like a service provider, polite but distant. But by the end of an installation, you've somehow become part of their temporary landscape. You hear phone conversations, witness family dynamics, catch glimpses of lives in progress. Some days you leave feeling like you've learned more about human nature than you bargained for. I'm good at reading people, maybe because I've had to. You learn to gauge someone's mood within the first 5 minutes of walking into their house. The woman who hovers because she's nervous about strangers in her space. The guy who immediately starts telling you about his latest home improvement disaster because he needs to feel useful. The elderly couple who offers you coffee and ends up telling you stories about their grandchildren while you work. That Tuesday started like any other. Marcus had scheduled me for 3 appointments, all in the Cherry Creek area, all relatively straightforward installations. The first 2 went exactly as expected. A young couple getting motorized blinds for their nursery, both of them excitedly talking about their first baby on the way. Then an older gentleman who needed blackout shades for his home office spent the whole time on work calls while I measured and mounted. By the time I pulled up to 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, it was just past 2 in the afternoon. The house was impressive without being ostentatious. It's a modern 2-story with clean lines and large windows that practically begged for the right window treatments. The landscaping was immaculate, not a leaf out of place, and there was a silver BMW in the driveway that looked like it had been detailed that morning. I grabbed my toolkit and the custom bamboo blinds from the van, checking the work order one more time. Diana Hartwell, motorized bamboo blinds for living room and master bedroom. Installation time estimated at 3 hours. Marcus had noted that she was particular about details and had specifically requested our most experienced installer. That was code for this. Client might be difficult, but she's paying premium prices, so make her happy. The woman who answered the door was not what I expected. Diana Hartwell was striking in a way that made you forget whatever you were about to say. She had dark hair with just enough silver to suggest wisdom rather than age, green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and the kind of confident posture that comes from knowing exactly who you are. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but she wore them like they were comfortable old clothes. "You must be Jake," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. Her voice had a slight rasp to it, like she'd spent years laughing or maybe singing. "Tiana, thank you for being so punctual." "Of course," I replied, suddenly aware that I was still holding the blinds and probably blocking her doorway. "I have everything we discussed with Marcus. Should we start with the living room?" She stepped aside to let me in, and I immediately understood why she'd wanted custom work. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced west. It's probably gorgeous for sunsets, but brutal for afternoon glare. The furniture was elegant but lived in, books everywhere, art on the walls that looked original rather than decorative. This wasn't a showroom house. It was clearly home to someone with actual interests and taste. "The light gets intense around this time of day," Diana explained, following my gaze to the windows. "I work from home sometimes, and it becomes impossible to see my computer screen." "These motorized bamboo blinds will be perfect," I said, setting down my tools and starting to unpack. "You'll be able to adjust them throughout the day without leaving your desk. The remote has preset positions, so you can find exactly the right amount of light filtering." As I began measuring and marking mounting points, Atana settled into a reading chair with what looked like a manuscript, red pen in hand. She was close enough that I caught a hint of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made me momentarily lose track of what I was doing. "Are you an editor?" I asked, partly to make conversation and partly because I was genuinely curious. "Gallery owner," she replied without looking up. "But I'm on the board of a literary magazine, so I end up reading submissions. It's volunteer work that I probably take too seriously." I nodded, returning to my measurements. There was something about her voice, the way she chose her words, that made even casual conversation feel more substantial than usual. She wasn't making small talk to fill silence. She was actually communicating. The installation started smoothly. The windows were standard sizes despite their height, and the walls were solid enough to support the motorized hardware without any surprises. I'd mounted the first bracket and was working on the second when Diana spoke again. "You're very methodical," she observed. "Most people would have started drilling immediately." "Measure twice, drill once," I replied, "especially with motorized blinds. If the brackets aren't perfectly level, the whole system will bind up. Patience isn't common in young people anymore." I paused, drill bit halfway to the wall. "Young people." She looked up from her manuscript. I realized she was studying me with the same attention she'd probably given the writing. "You can't be older than 30. 28, I confirmed, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm 50, she said matter-of-factly, old enough to remember when craftsmanship meant something. There was something in the way she said it, not bitter or nostalgic, just observational. Like she was noting a change in weather rather than commenting on generational differences. I found myself wanting to prove that some of us still cared about doing things right. The next hour passed in comfortable semi-silence. Diana occasionally answered phone calls, her voice shifting into a more professional tone as she discussed exhibition schedules and artist contracts. I learned that she owned a contemporary art gallery downtown. She was planning a show featuring local sculptors, and that she had strong opinions about art critics who prioritized theory over emotional response. When I finished the living room blinds and tested the motorized functions, Diana set aside her work to watch the demonstration. The blinds moved smoothly, silently, filtering the harsh afternoon sun into warm, honeyed light that transformed the entire room. "Perfect," she said, and I felt an unexpected surge of pride at her approval. "Ready for the master bedroom?" I asked, gathering my tools. "Follow me." The master bedroom was on the second floor, with windows facing both east and south. Was clearly her private sanctuary, decorated in soft blues and grays, with more books stacked on nightstands and a small desk positioned to catch morning light. The bed was unmade in a way that suggested she'd gotten up quickly, and there was a coffee cup on the dresser next to what looked like a half-finished crossword puzzle. I tried to focus on the technical aspects of the installation, but something about being in her personal space felt different from the living room, more intimate, even though she was maintaining the same friendly but professional distance. "This room gets morning sun," Diana explained, "but I'm not always ready for it. At 6:30, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The motorized controls will let you set automatic schedules, I said, setting up my ladder beneath the first window. You can program them to open gradually, like a natural sunrise. Technology serving humanity instead of replacing it. She mused. I like that. I was reaching up to mark the first mounting point when she spoke again, her voice different somehow, more tentative. Jake, can I ask you something personal? Paused, marker in hand. Sure. Do you think there's something wrong with a 50-year-old woman who finds herself attracted to someone your age? The marker slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I stood frozen on that ladder, staring down at the marker on her bedroom floor, my heart hammering so hard I was sure she could hear it. Diana's question hung in the air between us like a live wire, dangerous and electric. The late afternoon light streaming through her uncovered windows suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. I'm sorry, she said quickly, her composed demeanor cracking for the first time since I'd met her. That was completely inappropriate. I don't know what I was thinking. I climbed down the ladder slowly, buying myself time to process what had just happened. When I bent to pick up the marker, I could feel her watching me, waiting for some kind of response. But what do you say when a beautiful, successful woman, 22 years older than you, essentially admits she's attracted to you? When that admission makes your pulse race instead of making you uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with attraction, I finally said, straightening up to meet her eyes. Age is just a number, right? Diana laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Age is never just a number when you're the older one. Trust me on that. She moved to her desk, fidgeting with papers that didn't need organizing. I could see her trying to rebuild the professional distance we'd maintained all afternoon, but something fundamental had shifted in the room. The air felt charged, like right before a thunderstorm. Have you ever been in a relationship with someone significantly older? She asked, not looking at me. Define significantly, I said, surprised by my own boldness. Someone who remembers. Dial-up internet. Someone who had to learn what texting was. Someone who knows what it feels like to have people stare when you're out together. I considered the question seriously. My longest relationship was with someone 3 years older than me. We broke up because she wanted to get married and I wasn't ready. I've dated women my age, a few who were younger. But no, never anyone with that kind of age gap. Diana nodded like I'd confirmed something she already knew. I've been on 3 dates in the last 2 years. It's all with men my age or older. Successful men, accomplished men, men who checked all the right boxes on paper. She paused, finally, turning to look at me. I was bored out of my mind every single time. Boredom is worse than being alone, I said, meaning it. Exactly. Her eyes brightened slightly. But it's complicated when you're 50 and female. Society has very specific ideas about what's appropriate for us. We're supposed to be grateful for attention from men our age, even if they spend the entire dinner talking about their golf handicap or their ex-wives. I resumed setting up the ladder, partly because I needed to keep working and partly because I could think better when my hands were busy. What made you ask me that question? I mean, was it really just theoretical? Diana was quiet for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because for the first time in years, I'm attracted to someone. It's really attracted, not just settling or being practical. And it terrifies me. The honesty in her voice hit me like a physical force. I'd been attracted to her from the moment she opened the door, but I'd filed it away as the kind of harmless workplace crush that happens sometimes. Hearing her admit to feeling the same thing changed everything. Why does it terrify you? I asked, starting to mark the first mounting point. Because you're 28 and gorgeous and probably have women your own age throwing themselves at you. Because I'm at a stage in my life where I should know better. Because my daughter is only a few years younger than you, and that feels weird. Even to me? You have a daughter? Alina? She's 25. Just finished her master's degree in environmental science. She's brilliant and idealistic, and would probably have opinions about me having this conversation. I processed this information while measuring the distance between mounting points. Diana had a daughter practically my age. It should have felt strange, but instead it just made her seem more real, more human. She wasn't just an elegant woman in an expensive house. She was someone's mother, someone with a full, complicated life. What does she do now? I asked. She's working for a nonprofit that focuses on urban sustainability, saving the world one solar panel at a time. The pride in Diana's voice was unmistakable. She lives in her own apartment about 10 minutes from here. We have dinner together twice a week, and she calls me whenever she needs to vent about her boss or her love life. Sounds like you two are close. We are now. It wasn't always easy. Her father and I divorced when she was 12, and I probably threw myself into work too much afterward. Guilt makes you either overprotective or absent, and I chose absent. Lena and I had to rebuild our relationship when she was in college. What happened with her father? Diana's expression hardened slightly. Robert was a good provider and a terrible husband. He wanted a wife who would host dinner parties and look beautiful at business functions. I wanted a partner who saw me as more than an accessory. We spent 5 years trying to make each other into different people before we finally admitted it wasn't working. I drilled the first mounting bracket into place, the sound sharp and decisive in the quiet room. When the noise stopped, Diana continued. The ironic thing is that Robert is dating someone 25 years younger than him now, a former intern at his law firm. Nobody bats an eye because that's what successful older men do. But if I showed up somewhere with you, people would assume I was having a midlife crisis or that you were after my money. Are you having a midlife crisis? Asked with a slight smile. Honestly. Maybe, but if I am, it's the kind where I want to start living authentically instead of just safely. I secured the second bracket and moved the ladder to the next window. The physical work helped me think, gave me something to focus on besides the growing tension in the room. But Diana's words kept circling in my head, living authentically instead of safely. What did that even look like for someone like her? For someone like me? I ask you something now, said fair enough. What would authentic look like for you? I mean, if you weren't worried about what other people thought, what would you want? Diana moved to the window, looking out at her perfectly manicured backyard. I'd want to stop pretending that age appropriate equals right for me. I'd want to stop dismissing attraction because it doesn't fit someone else's timeline. I'd want to see what happens when two people who genuinely enjoy each other's company explore that connection, regardless of what year they were born. The sincerity in her voice made something shift in my chest. This wasn't about rebellion or proving a point. It was about two people who felt drawn to each other, trying to figure out if that was worth exploring. And what would that exploration look like, I asked, surprised by my own directness. I have no idea, she admitted. Never been in this situation before. When I was your age, I was married and focused on building a family. When I was dating after my divorce, I stayed within conventional boundaries because it felt safer. This is uncharted territory for me. I finished mounting the brackets on the second window and started unpacking the blind mechanism. The work was methodical, requiring precision, but my mind was racing. Here was this incredible woman, successful and beautiful and interesting, admitting that she was attracted to me, not just physically, but genuinely drawn to who I was as a person. When had that ever happened to me before? Jake, Diana said suddenly, I need you to know that I'm not trying to put you in an uncomfortable position. You're here to do a job, and I've probably already crossed about 10 professional boundaries. If you want to finish the installation and leave, I completely understand. I paused in my work, looking at her directly. Do you want me to finish and leave? No, she said immediately. But what I want isn't always what's best for everyone involved. What if what you want is exactly what's best? What if overthinking this is the only thing making it complicated? Diana studied my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. You're 28 years old. You should be dating women who want to go to music festivals and stay out until 3 in the morning. You should be with someone who's figuring out life at the same pace you are. Maybe, I said, threading the blind cord through the mechanism. Or maybe I should be with someone who challenges me to think differently. Someone who's already figured out what matters and isn't afraid to go after it. Is that what you think I am? Considered the question while testing the motor function. The blinds moved smoothly, responding to the remote control with quiet efficiency. I think you're someone who built a successful business, raised a daughter, survived a difficult marriage, and still has the courage to be vulnerable with a stranger. That's pretty impressive. Diana smiled for the first time since asking her explosive question. You're very good at this. Stalling blinds, making someone feel seen. The compliment hit me harder than it should have. In my experience, most people saw me as the guy who showed up to fix their windows and disappeared. Clients were usually polite but distant, treating me like part of the service industry rather than a person with thoughts and opinions. Diana had been having actual conversations with me all afternoon, asking about my perspectives, listening to my answers like they mattered. Can I tell you something? I said, moving the ladder to the final window. Of course. I've been thinking about you since I walked in here. Not just because you're beautiful, though you obviously are. It's the way you talk about things, like you actually care about the answers. It's how you pay attention to details most people miss. It's the fact that you read manuscripts for a literary magazine because you think it matters, even though you don't get paid for it. Diana's cheeks flushed slightly, and I realized I'd been more honest than I'd intended. You noticed all that in 3 hours? She asked. Sometimes 3 hours is enough to know something important, I said, drilling the final mounting bracket into place. The question is whether we're brave enough to find out what that something is. I finished the installation as the sun was setting, the motorized blinds casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across Diana's bedroom walls. She stood beside me as I ran through the control functions one more time, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. So, she said as I packed up my tools, what happens next? Well, I said, closing my toolkit, I could leave my business card and hope you call if you have any issues with the blinds. And the other option? I met her eyes, feeling like I was about to step off a cliff. The other option is, I ask if you'd like to have dinner with me tomorrow night. Somewhere quiet, where we can talk without power tools and Venetian blinds getting in the way. Diana was quiet for a long moment, and I felt my confidence wavering. Maybe I'd misread the entire situation. Maybe her honesty had been more about processing her feelings out loud than indicating interest in pursuing anything. Jake, she finally said, if we do this, if we explore whatever this is between us, it's going to be complicated. People will have opinions. There will be judgment. From who? My daughter, my friends, your friends, random strangers who see us together? Society in general? Shouldered my tool bag and looked at her seriously. Do you live your life based on what random strangers think? No, she said slowly. I stopped doing that when I divorced Robert. Then why start again now? Diana smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. You're very persuasive when you want to be. Is that a yes to dinner? That's a yes to dinner, she said. But I get to choose the restaurant. Deal. As I headed toward the door, Diana caught my arm gently. Jake, thank you for not making me feel ridiculous about any of this. Thank you for being honest enough to ask the question in the first place. I left her house that evening with her phone number saved in my contacts and a dinner reservation planned for the following night. But as I drove home through the Denver traffic, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger than a simple dinner date. Diana Hartwell wasn't just a woman I was attracted to. She was someone who could change the entire trajectory of my life. The question was whether I was ready for that kind of change, whether she was ready to trust someone 22 years younger with her carefully rebuilt heart. The restaurant Diana chose was exactly what I should have expected from her. Sophisticated, without being pretentious. Tucked away in a historic building downtown where the lighting was warm and conversations stayed private. She arrived wearing a black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. And when she smiled at me from across the hostess stand, I felt like I'd won some kind of lottery I hadn't even known I'd entered. You look nervous, she said as we were seated at a corner table. A little, I admitted. This is new territory for me. The restaurant? Dating someone who intimidates me in the best possible way? Diana laughed, the sound drawing glances from nearby tables. I intimidate you? You're the one who convinced? Me to take a risk I've been avoiding for 2 years. The server appeared to take our drink orders, and I watched Diana interact with him. She was polite but not overly friendly, confident in her choices, the kind of person who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it. When she ordered a wine I'd never heard of, I felt the age gap between us, like a physical distance. Tell me about your business, she said after the server left. How did you go from business school to installing window treatments? I'd told this story dozens of times, but something about her attention made me want to be more honest than usual. I was studying business administration because it seemed practical. My parents wanted me to have a stable career, something that looked good on paper, but I was miserable sitting in lectures about market analysis and corporate strategy. What changed? My uncle Tommy. He owned a small construction company, and I started working for him during summer breaks. Nothing fancy, just basic carpentry and home repairs. But there was something about creating something with my hands, about solving practical problems that had immediate, visible results. I felt useful in a way I never did in a classroom. Diana nodded like she understood completely. There's honesty in physical work. No hiding behind theory or abstractions. Exactly. When I dropped out junior year, my parents acted like I had announced I was joining a cult. They kept asking what I was going to do with my life, like working with my hands wasn't a real answer. Are they still disappointed? I considered the question while Diana studied the wine list. They've come around mostly. When I started making more money than some of my friends with college degrees, they started telling people I was an entrepreneur instead of a dropout. Money has a way of making people reconsider their definitions of success, Diana said dryly.
What about you? Did you always want to own an art gallery?
God, no. I studied accounting in college because my father convinced me it was practical. Spent 5 years working for a firm that specialized in tax preparation for small businesses. I was good at it, but I felt like I was slowly dying inside. What changed for you? Diana's expression grew distant. Robert, actually. When we were first married, he used to drag me to these business networking events. Lots of lawyers and executives talking about deals and mergers. But sometimes there would be art on the walls, and I found myself gravitating toward the paintings. Instead of the conversations, she paused as our wine arrived, waiting for the ritual of tasting and approval before continuing. I started visiting galleries on weekends, reading about artists, learning about different movements and techniques. It became an obsession. When Alina was old enough for school, I volunteered to help with fundraising for a local art center. That's where I met Carmen Rodriguez, the artist. You know her work? I installed blinds in a house that had one of her sculptures in the entryway. The homeowner spent 20 minutes telling me about how much it cost. Diana smiled. Carmen became my mentor, though she never called it that. She taught me to see art as more than decoration, to understand how it could change the way people experience space and emotion. When the opportunity came up to buy the gallery, she convinced me to take the risk. What did Robert think about that? Diana's smile faded. Robert thought it was an expensive hobby that would distract me from being the kind of wife he needed. He tolerated it as long as I kept it small. But when I started talking about expansion, about hosting major exhibitions, he made it clear that my success was threatening to his image. I took a sip of wine, trying to process the layers of her story. He wanted you to stay small so he could stay comfortable. That's a very perceptive way to put it. Robert needed to be the successful one in the relationship. My gallery was fine as long as it was a charming side project, but when it started actually competing with his law practice for attention and respect, it became a problem. Our appetizers arrived, giving us both a moment to shift topics. As Diana talked about the challenges of running a gallery, about discovering new artists and navigating the politics of the art world, I found myself increasingly drawn to her passion for her work. She wasn't just successful. She was someone who had found her calling and pursued it despite significant obstacles. Can I ask you something personal? I said as we waited for our main courses. We're a little past worrying about personal boundaries, don't you think? When you asked me that question yesterday, about choosing a 50-year-old over someone younger, were you really asking about me specifically, or were you testing some theory? Diana set down her wine glass and looked at me directly. I was asking about you specifically, but I was also asking about myself, about whether I'm brave enough to want something that doesn't fit conventional expectations. And what conclusion did you reach? That I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think is appropriate for me. That maybe it's time to prioritize what actually makes me happy over what looks right on paper. Before I could respond, Diana's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed completely. "I'm sorry. I need to take this," she said, already reaching for the phone. "Elena, what's wrong?" I could hear the panic in her daughter's voice, even though I couldn't make out the words. Diana's face went pale as she listened. "Slow down, honey. Where are you now? Okay, stay there. I'm coming to get you." She hung up and grabbed her purse. "I have to go." Elena's car broke down and she's stranded in a part of town where she doesn't feel safe. "Where is she?" "About 20 minutes from here, near the University District." I stood up with her. "I'll drive you." My van is more reliable than your BMW if we need to tow anything." Diana hesitated. "Jake, you don't have to get involved in my family drama." "Too late," I said, already signaling the server for our check. "I'm already involved." The drive to pick up Elena was tense, with Diana navigating while I drove and tried to ask the right questions about what might be wrong with her daughter's car. When we pulled up behind a small Honda Civic with its hazard lights flashing, I could see a young woman pacing beside it, phone pressed to her ear. Elena looked exactly like her mother might have at 25, with the same dark hair and intelligent eyes. But where Diana carried herself with hard-won confidence, Elena seemed frustrated and slightly overwhelmed. She looked up as we approached, and I saw her take in the sight of her mother arriving with a man she'd never seen before. "Mom, thank God," Elena said, rushing to hug Diana. "It just started making this horrible grinding noise and then died." "Completely. Are you okay? You're not hurt?" "I'm fine, just freaked out. I was supposed to meet friends for dinner, and now I'm stuck here with a dead car and no idea what's wrong with it." Diana turned to me. "Lena, this is Jake. He's the one who installed my new blinds yesterday. Jake, this is my daughter, Elena." Elena's eyes moved between us, and I could see her brain working to understand why her mother had been at dinner with the window installation guy. But she was polite enough to extend her hand. "Nice to meet you," she said, though her tone suggested she was reserving judgment. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" I asked. Elena looked surprised. "You know about cars too? A little?" "Most mechanical problems have similar underlying principles." I popped the hood and immediately heard Diana explaining to Elena how we'd ended up driving together. Elena's responses were carefully neutral, but I could feel her watching me as I examined the engine. "When did you last have the timing belt replaced?" I called out. "The what belt?" Elena replied. "That's your problem," I said, straightening up. The timing belt snapped. "It's not something you can fix on the side of the road, but it's also not catastrophic. You'll need to have it towed to a shop." "How much is that going to cost?" Elena asked, and I heard the stress in her voice. "Depending on the shop, probably between $400 and $600 for parts and labor." Elena's face fell. "I don't have that kind of money right now. My budget is basically ramen noodles and student loan payments." Diana immediately reached for her purse. "Elena, I can cover it." "Mom, no. I can't keep letting you bail me out every time something goes wrong. I'm supposed to be an adult." I watched this exchange, recognizing the tension between a parent who wanted to help and a young adult struggling to establish independence. It reminded me of similar conversations I'd had with my own parents. "What if we compromise?" I suggested. "I know a guy who does honest work for fair prices. If your mom covers the parts, you could pay me back for the labor by helping me with some office work for my business." "Marcus has been begging me to get our invoicing system organized." Elena looked skeptical. "You'd trust me with your business?" "Finances. You have a master's degree in environmental science. I think you can handle basic data entry." Diana smiled at this exchange, and I realized I'd managed to offer Elena a way to accept help without feeling like charity. Elena seemed to be considering the proposal seriously. "That's actually not a terrible idea," she said slowly. "How many hours of office work are we talking about?" "It's probably 15 or 20 hours, depending on how much of a mess Marcus has made of our filing system." "Deal," Elena said, extending her hand again. This time her grip was firmer, more trusting. As we waited for the tow truck Diana had called, Elena started asking me questions about my business, about how I'd learned about cars, about whether I'd gone to college. Her interrogation was subtle, but thorough, and I realized I was being evaluated as someone who might be spending time with her mother. "So you dropped out of business school to install window treatments?" Elena asked. "Basically, yeah."
I know.
"It probably sounds like a step backward. Actually, it sounds like you figured out what made you happy and had the courage to pursue it." That's more than most people can say. I glanced at Diana, who was watching this conversation with Anne. Expression, I couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe, that her daughter was being firm-minded. Possibly relief that Alina wasn't immediately hostile to the idea of me being in their lives. When the tow truck finally arrived, Alina rode with the driver to make sure her car got to the right shop, while Diana and I followed in my van. The drive gave us our first chance to talk privately since leaving the restaurant. Well, Diana said, that wasn't exactly how I planned for you to meet my daughter. How did you plan for me to meet her? I hadn't gotten that far yet. I was still trying to figure out if this was something worth introducing her to, and now. Diana was quiet for a moment. Now I'm thinking that watching you problem solve her car situation and offer her a way to maintain her dignity while accepting help told me more about who you are than 3 dinner conversations might have. Good things or concerning things. Very good things. Alina is the most important person in my life. The fact that you immediately understood that and acted accordingly means everything to me. We followed the tow truck to Marcus Auto Repair, a shop I'd used before when my van needed work. The owner, Pete, was still there despite the late hour, and he confirmed my diagnosis about Elena's timing belt. He also quoted a price that was on the lower end of what I'd estimated, which earned me a grateful look from both women. As we prepared to leave, Alina pulled me aside. Jake, can I ask you something? Sure, what are your intentions with my mom? The directness of her question caught me off guard. Honestly, I don't know yet. We just met yesterday, and this is our first date. But I like her a lot. She's smart and funny and passionate about things that matter. I'd like to see where this goes, if she's willing. Alina studied my face like she was trying to determine if I was telling the truth. She's been hurt before. By my dad, but also by other people who made her feel like she had to choose between being herself and being acceptable. I'm not asking her to choose anything. I like her exactly as she is. Good, Alina said. Because if you hurt her, I will find a way to make your life very unpleasant. I couldn't help but smile at her protectiveness.
Fair enough.
But for what it's worth, I think she's perfectly capable of making her own decisions about who's worth her time. She is. But it's nice to know that you recognize that. As we drove Diana home, she seemed more relaxed than she had all evening. The crisis with Elena's car had somehow made our dinner date feel less like an experiment and more like the beginning of something real. Thank you, she said, as I walked her to her door. For tonight, for helping with Alina, for not running away when things got complicated. Why would I run away? Because most men your age don't want to deal with family drama on a first date. I stepped closer to her, close enough to catch that subtle perfume again. Diana, I'm not most men my age. And this isn't just any first date. She looked up at me, and for a moment I thought she might invite me inside. Instead, she reached up and touched my cheek gently. No, she said softly. It's not. As I drove home that night, I realized that everything had changed. What had started as a simple attraction to an intriguing client had become something much more complex. I wasn't just interested in Diana anymore. I was invested in her life, her relationship with her daughter, her happiness in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. The question was whether I was ready for the kind of relationship that came with real stakes, real consequences, and real responsibilities. And whether Diana was ready to trust someone like me with something as precious as her carefully rebuilt world. 3 weeks after our first date, I was beginning to think I'd figured out how to navigate this new reality. Diana and I had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of evening phone calls, weekend coffee dates, and stolen moments when her schedule allowed. Alina had started helping me organize Sullivan Window Solutions paperwork every Tuesday evening, and somewhere between filing invoices and updating our customer database, she'd become an unexpected ally. I was installing plantation shutters in a sprawling house in Cherry Hills Village when Marcus called with what he thought was good news. Jake, you're not going to believe this, he said, his voice practically vibrating with excitement through my phone speaker. I just booked us the biggest job of the year, maybe the biggest job ever. I paused in my measuring, immediately suspicious. Marcus's definition of good news didn't always align with reality. How big are we talking? 15,000 square feet, custom motorized everything. Blinds, shutters, automated curtains for a whole home theater system. The client wants the full treatment and they specifically requested you for the installation. 15,000 square feet? I set down my tape measure. Marcus, that's like 3 regular houses. How long did you tell them it would take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. But Jake, the commission on this job will pay for our showroom expansion and then some. We're talking about enough money to hire 2 more installers and buy that new van you've been wanting. Despite my wariness about Marcus's enthusiasm, I felt a surge of excitement. This was the kind of job that could transform our business from a small operation into something substantial. Who's the client? Hartwell. Robert Hartwell. Some big-shot lawyer who's renovating a house in Greenwood Village. Says he knows your work through a mutual connection. Hey, the name hit me like a physical blow. Robert Hartwell, Diana's ex-husband. The man who'd left her for someone half his age and spent years making her feel like her dreams were inconvenient to his success. I sat down heavily on the homeowner's couch, trying to process what this meant. Jake, you still there? Yeah, I'm here. When does he want to start? I know it's short notice, but he's paying a 50% deposit up front. Cash flow like this could set us up for the entire next year. I closed my eyes, imagining Diana's reaction when she found out I was working for Robert. Would she see it as a betrayal? A conflict of interest? Or would she understand that this was business, and business was how I paid my bills and built my future? Send me the address and the specifications, I said finally. I'll look at the scope and let you know if the timeline is realistic. Already on its way to your email? Jake, this is it. This is our big break. After hanging up, I sat in the stranger's living room for a long time, staring at my phone. I could call Diana and tell her about the job, explain that I hadn't known who the client was when Marcus booked it, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear that she'd asked me to turn it down. I'd have to choose between her feelings and the biggest opportunity my business had ever seen. Instead, I finished the shutter installation and drove to the address Marcus had sent me. The house was massive, a modern monstrosity of glass and steel that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine rather than a neighborhood. The kind of place that screamed, "Look how successful I am," to anyone who drove past. Robert Hartwell was waiting for me in the circular driveway, leaning against a black Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. He was exactly what I'd expected based on Diana's descriptions: tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested he never questioned whether he belonged in any space he occupied. "You must be Jake," he said, extending a hand with the kind of firm grip that was meant to establish dominance. Robert Hartwell. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mr. Hartwell. I understand you're looking at a comprehensive window treatment installation. That's right. I'm renovating this entire property for my fiancée. She has very specific ideas about privacy and light control. He gestured toward the house with obvious pride. Nothing but the best for my Stephanie. The way he said "my Stephanie" made my skin crawl, like he was talking about a possession rather than a person. But I nodded professionally and followed him toward the front entrance. I should mention, Robert said as we walked, I know we have a mutual friend, Diana Hartwell, my ex-wife. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart rate spiked. Small world, indeed. She mentioned that you'd done some work for her recently. Spoke very highly of your professionalism. There was something in his tone that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Mrs. Hartwell was a pleasure to work with, I said carefully. Robert chuckled, a sound without warmth. Diana always did have good taste in service providers. Though I have to say, I was surprised to hear she'd moved on so quickly after our divorce. I'm not sure I follow. Oh, I think you do. Robert stopped walking and turned to face me directly. See, I make it my business to know what's going on in Diana's life, especially when it involves younger men spending time at her house. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. I realized this wasn't about window treatments at all. This was about power, about control, about a man who couldn't stand the idea that his ex-wife had found happiness without him. Mr. Hartwell. If you're uncomfortable with me working on your project because of my professional relationship with your ex-wife, I completely understand. Okay. I can recommend several other installers who do excellent work. No, Jake. I specifically want you. For this job, you see, I believe in giving people opportunities to prove themselves. And I'm very curious to see what kind of work ethic you have when there's real money on the line. We spent the next hour touring the house while Robert outlined his requirements. Every room needed custom treatments. The master suite required blackout capabilities for his fiancée's sensitive sleep schedule. The home office needed privacy screens for confidential client calls. The entertainment areas demanded automated systems that could transform the lighting with the touch of a button. It was an installer's dream job, technically challenging and financially rewarding. It was also clearly a test, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was being tested for. The timeline is aggressive, Robert said as we finished the walkthrough, but I'm willing to pay premium rates for premium service. Overtime, weekend work, whatever it takes to get this done in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Mr. Hartwell, a project this size typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, especially with the level of customization you're requesting. I have complete confidence in your abilities. Diana told me you were remarkably efficient. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass, unless you're not the professional she thinks you are. I realized he was manipulating me, using Diana's praise as a weapon, to push me into an impossible timeline. But I also realized that backing down would confirm whatever assumptions he'd already made about me. I'll need to bring in additional help, I said. And the rushed timeline will affect the pricing. Money is no object. I just want it done right, and I want it done fast. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the contract Marcus had drawn up, trying to decide what to do. The job would transform our business, but it would also mean 3 weeks of working closely with a man who clearly had ulterior motives. Worse, it would mean keeping a secret from Diana, at least until I figured out how to tell her. My phone rang, and Diana's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered not answering, but that felt like cowardice. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Hey yourself. How was your day?" Marcus said you had a big consultation. Yeah, it was. Interesting. How was the gallery? Busy. We're hanging pieces for the new exhibition next week. Alina stopped by after work to help. With the catalog design, Kana's voice was warm, relaxed. She's really enjoying the office work she's doing for you. Says it's helping her understand the business side of environmental consulting. She's great with organizational systems. It's much better than Marcus. Speaking of which, she mentioned that you might be taking on a bigger project soon. Something that could really help grow the business. My stomach dropped. Did she say anything specific about it? Just that Marcus was excited about landing a high-end client? Why? Is everything okay? You sound tense. This was my chance. To tell her the truth, to explain the situation, and get her perspective on how to handle it. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the happiness in her voice, or the knowledge that this news would complicate everything between us. Just tired, I said. It's been a long day. Well, get some rest. I was thinking we could grab breakfast tomorrow before you start. Work, there's something I want to talk to you about. Good something? Or concerning something? Diana laughed. Good something, at least. I hope you'll think it's good. After we hung up, I poured myself a beer and sat on my small balcony, looking out at the Denver skyline. In the distance, I could see the lights of the neighborhood where Diana lived, where she was probably reading or working on gallery business, completely unaware that her ex-husband had just hired me for the biggest job of my career. The next morning, I met Diana at a small cafe near her house, watching her face light up as she talked about her plans for the gallery's upcoming exhibition. She was wearing a blue sweater that brought out her eyes, and her enthusiasm for the artist she was featuring made her even more beautiful than usual. The opening is next Friday, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. I'd love for you to come. I know it's not really your scene, but it would mean a lot to me to have you there. Of course I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it. Good, because I was thinking. She paused, suddenly looking nervous. I was thinking I'd like to introduce you to some of my friends, people who matter to me. If you're comfortable with that. The weight of her request hit me immediately. This wasn't just about attending an art opening. It was about going public. With our relationship, about stepping out of the private bubble we'd been living in and acknowledging to her social circle that we were together. Diana, are you sure? I mean, people are going to have opinions about us, about the age difference. Let them have opinions. I'm tired of hiding what makes me happy because other people might not understand it. I squeezed her hand, feeling simultaneously elated and guilty. Here she was, ready to take a public stand for our relationship, while I was keeping a major secret about working for her ex-husband. I'd be honored to meet your friends, I said, meaning it completely, or something else. Diana continued. Elena wants to have dinner with both of us this weekend. Real dinner, not an emergency car rescue. She says she wants to get to know you better. That sounds great. Fair warning. She's going to grill you about your intentions, your long-term goals. Probably your credit score and your relationship with your mother. I laughed despite my inner turmoil. I can handle Alina. I know you can. That's one of the things I love about you. The word love hung in the air between us, and I saw Diana's eyes widen slightly as she realized what she'd said. We hadn't talked about love yet, hadn't defined what this relationship was becoming beyond the fact that it felt right to both of us. Diana, I didn't mean to say that. I did mean it, but I didn't mean to say it like that. So casually over coffee and muffins. I brought her hand to my lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I love things about you too. A lot of things that's not quite the same thing. No, but it's honest. And maybe that's enough for right now. Diana smiled, and I felt the tension between us ease. But as we sat there planning our weekend, I couldn't shake the knowledge that everything was about to become much more complicated. Robert's job would start Monday, and I'd have to find a way to tell Diana that I was working for the man who'd made her question her own worth for years. Later that day, Marcus and I spent hours going over the specifications for the Hartwell project, ordering materials and scheduling subcontractors. The scope was even more complex than I'd initially realized. With integrated smart home systems and custom millwork that would require coordination with multiple trades, this is going to be intense, Marcus said, reviewing the timeline. If we pull this off, we'll have bragging rights for years. Every high-end client in Denver will want to work with us. And if we don't pull it off, if we don't get paid, our reputation is ruined, and we probably go out of business. But let's focus on the positive outcomes. That evening, I drove past Diana's house 3 times before finally parking and walking to her door. She answered wearing paint-stained clothes and a confused expression. Jake, what are you doing here? I thought you were working late tonight. I was. I am. I need to tell you something, and I wanted to do it in person. She stepped aside to let me in, and I could see canvases drying in her living room. She'd been painting, something I didn't even know she did. Is everything okay? You look like someone died. Diana, I got that big job. Marcus was excited. About the one that could really help grow our business. That's wonderful. Why do you look like it's terrible news? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would change everything between us, because the client is Robert.
Your
ex-husband. And he specifically requested me for the job. The silence that followed my confession stretched so long I started to wonder if Diana had stopped breathing. She stood frozen in her living room, paintbrush still in her hand, staring at me like I'd just told her I was secretly married. Specifically requested you, she finally said, her voice flat. Yes, and you said yes. I haven't signed the contract yet. Wanted to talk to you first. Diana set down her brush with deliberate care and walked to the window. The same window where I'd installed her motorized blinds just a month ago. Everything had been simpler then. Just a service call and an unexpected attraction.
We were...
Standing in the wreckage of something that had felt like it might become love. He knows about us, she said, not turning around. I think so. He made some comments about your taste in service providers. Said he makes it his business to know what's going on in your life. Of course he does. Diana's laugh was bitter. Robert can't stand the idea that I might be happy without him. When he left, he told me I'd never find anyone who could handle my independence. Apparently, he's decided to test that theory. I moved closer to her, close enough to see her reflection in the glass. Diana, I don't have to take this job. We can find other opportunities. Can you? She turned to face me. Jake, be honest. How many 15,000 square foot projects come through your door? How many chances do you get to transform your business overnight? It doesn't matter if it costs me you, but it should matter. This is your career, your future. I won't be the reason you pass up the opportunity of a lifetime. I reached for her hands, but she stepped back. What are you saying? I'm saying Robert is smarter than I gave him credit for. He's put you in an impossible position. Turn down the job and sacrifice your business for a relationship that's only a month old? Take the job and prove that money matters more than my feelings. Those aren't the only options, aren't they? Diana's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Jake, you don't know Robert like I do. This isn't just about window treatments. He's going to make that job as difficult as possible. You'll find reasons to criticize your work, demand changes that weren't in the original scope, make you jump through hoops just to prove you can. And if you push back, he'll find a way to make it your fault. I don't push back. I do the work, collect the payment, and move on. For 3 weeks, you'll be in his house listening to him talk about his new fiancée, his successful practice, his perfect life. He'll make sure you know that he can afford to pay you more in a month than you probably make in a year. He'll remind you subtly but constantly that you're the hired help and I'm his ex-wife who's dating down. The pain in her voice hit me, harder than any anger could have. This wasn't about jealousy or possessiveness. This was about a woman who'd spent years rebuilding her self-worth after a marriage that had systematically torn it down. What if you're wrong? I asked. What if it really is just a coincidence and Robert doesn't even know we're seeing each other? Diana smiled sadly. Then you're more naive than I thought. Robert doesn't do coincidences. Everything he does is calculated to give him an advantage. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Client wants to finalize contract tonight.
Hey.
Are we doing this or not? I showed Diana the message and she read it without expression. You have to decide, she said quietly. And whatever you decide, I'll understand. Diana, Jake, listen to me. I'm 50 years old. I've been through a marriage that nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth, raised a daughter as a single mother, and built a business from nothing. I've learned to survive disappointment. This doesn't have to be a disappointment, doesn't it? If you take this job, every day for the next 3 weeks, you'll be working for a man who treated me like an inconvenience for 15 years. You'll be taking his money, listening to his opinions, catering to his demands. How long before you start seeing me through his eyes? That's not going to happen. You say that now. But Robert is very good at making people feel small. And if he can make you doubt yourself, he can make you doubt us. I pulled out my phone and started typing a response to Marcus. What are you doing? Diana asked. Telling him we're not taking the job. No. Diana caught my wrist. You can't do that. Watch me, Jake. If you turn down this opportunity because of me, you'll resent me for it eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but someday when another big opportunity doesn't come along. You'll remember this moment and wonder what your life would have looked like if you'd made a different choice. I put my phone away and pulled Diana into my arms. She resisted for a moment, then melted against me, her face buried in my chest. What if there's a third option? I said into her hair. Like what? Like I take the job, but I set boundaries. I make it clear to Robert that this is strictly business. I document everything, protect myself legally, and refuse to engage with whatever games he wants to play. Diana pulled back to look at me. And if he makes it impossible, if he creates problems that threaten your reputation, and I walk away, but I go in with my eyes open, prepared for his tactics. Maybe the best way to beat Robert at his own game is to refuse to play it. Diana was quiet for a long moment, considering this. You really think you can work for him for 3 weeks? Without letting him get to you? I think I can do anything if I know you're waiting for me at the end of each day. She smiled for the first time since I'd delivered my news. That's either very romantic or very foolish, maybe both. That night I called Marcus and told him we'd take the job, but with conditions. I wanted everything in writing, detailed specifications that couldn't be changed without written approval, and payment schedules tied to completion milestones. If Robert wanted to play games, he'd have to do it within contractual boundaries. The first week of the installation was exactly as difficult as Diana had predicted. Robert found reasons to criticize measurements that were precise to the millimeter, demanded modifications that weren't in the original plans, and made sure I understood that his time was more valuable than mine. But I stuck to the contract, documented every conversation, and refused to let his condescension affect my work. Diana came to see me every evening, not to check up on me, but to remind me who I was outside of Robert's manipulation. She'd bring coffee and sit in my van while I told her about the day's challenges, offering perspective and encouragement without trying to solve my problems for me. He offered me a drink today, I told her on Thursday of the second week. Expensive scotch from his private collection. Said he wanted to toast our successful working relationship. Did you accept? I told him I don't drink on the job. He said that showed admirable professionalism for someone so young. Diana winced. Classic Robert. Offering something that seems generous, then using your response to reinforce his superiority. The weird thing is, it doesn't bother me anymore. I know what he's doing, so it's like watching a predictable magic trick. Once you see the mechanics, it stops being impressive. By the final week, something had shifted in the dynamic. Robert's attempts to diminish me felt increasingly desperate, like he was frustrated that his usual tactics weren't working. When he made condescending comments about my age or experience, I responded with calm professionalism. When he tried to add work outside the contract scope, I politely referred him to the change order process. On the last day of installation, as I was testing the final automated system, Robert appeared in the doorway of what would be his new home office. I have to admit, Sullivan, you've exceeded my expectations. Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. I'm glad you're satisfied with the work. I am. In fact, I'm impressed enough that I'd like to recommend your services to some colleagues. There's a lot of money in this city and people talk. I continued my testing without looking up. I appreciate that. Of course, I'd want to make sure you understand the importance of discretion. Some of these potential clients value privacy highly. All of our clients' information is confidential, Mr. Hartwell. That's standard business practice. Good, because it would be unfortunate if personal relationships, complicated professional opportunities. I finally looked at him directly. Are you threatening me, Mr. Hartwell? Not at all. I'm simply pointing out that Denver's high-end market is smaller than you might think. Reputations matter, and some reputations are more fragile than others. I finished the system test and packed up my tools. The installation is complete, and all systems are functioning according to specifications. You have my card if any issues arise during the warranty period. Robert's smile was cold but resigned. He'd spent 3 weeks trying to intimidate me, manipulate me, or buy me off, and none of it had worked. I was still with Diana, still confident in my abilities, still building my business on my own terms. That evening, Diana met me at her house. With a bottle of champagne and a smile that made the previous 3 weeks worth every frustrating moment. How does it feel to be done? She asked as we sat on her back patio, watching the sunset. Like I just survived a test I didn't know I was taking. And did you pass? I thought about it seriously. I think we both did. Robert wanted to prove that you'd chosen someone who could be bought, intimidated, or driven away. Instead, he proved that you chose someone who values you more than money or convenience. Diana leaned against my shoulder. I'm proud of you. Not just for finishing the job, but for staying true to yourself through all of Robert's manipulations. I had good motivation. What's that? A 50-year-old woman who's worth more than any contract could ever be? Diana laughed, the sound warm and free. So you would choose a 50-year-old over someone younger? Every single time, I said, kissing the top of her head, especially if she's as remarkable as you are. 6 months later, Sullivan Window Solutions had expanded into a showroom space downtown, and Diana's gallery was featuring an exhibition of contemporary works that had drawn attention from collectors across the region. Alina had finished organizing our business systems and started dating a fellow environmental scientist who treated her like she was brilliant and funny instead of just convenient. And me, it's learning that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about finding someone worth building a new life with, regardless of what anyone else thinks about the timeline. Diana and I were building something together, something that had survived Robert's manipulations and society's expectations. and our own fears about whether it was possible for two people from such different places in life to create something lasting. Turned out the answer was simple. When you find someone who sees your worth, challenges your assumptions, and makes you want to be the best version of yourself, age becomes just another detail in a much bigger story. And our story was just getting started. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.